And we're live. I think we are.
You look like it.
Yeah, it'll take a few seconds there. Oh, it is working. People are watching. Okay, I can't see it, but other people can. Okay. So, ladies and gents, Ali, can you see me on the back of the phone? My head chopped off.
Your head's chopped off.
Right.
There you go. Yeah, it's
Okay.
perfect.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first ever virtual New Sheridan Club club night. Normally, Talk would introduce things at this point. Obviously, he's not in our house. And we wouldn't let him in our house anyway, not unless we could boil him first. So normally we'd give you a roundup of forthcoming events. Of course, there aren't going to be any of those. If you look in the latest newsletter, you'll see that I've listed some virtual events that I know of. If you know of any others that you think might be of interest to fellow club members, do drop me a line and I'll put those on the website. Also, don't forget to send us your virtual club night selfie, so I've got something to put in the next newsletter as well. Okay, without further ado, I'm going to introduce Mrs. H, who's going to talk to you about Rex Whistler. Clap, 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 clap.
Hello. Am I in the right place?
Yeah, pretty
Yeah,
much.
You can see the screen.
I might just... Oh, that's all right, yeah.
Oh, hello everyone. Isn't this exciting? Yes, as Simon said, welcome to the first cyber moot of the NSC. I'm sure that there's true to form. There'll be some technological difficulties along the way as someone stumps up.
Mark Gibbon is
Court
clapping. Everyone's clapping.
Hello Mark. Hello Sue. Hello Henry. Hello Darcy. I saw you all popping up. Okay, well, are you all happy with the level of sound if I keep speaking at this level? Is that okay for everybody?
There's a bit of a lag on this. Send us a notification if you can't hear it. I can't seem to get it on Facebook at the moment, but I'm seeing messages on the back of my phone. Mark says, yep.
Okay.
Sarah says sound is fine. Ace, okay.
Great. Right. Well, then I'll get going. NSC members of a certain vintage might remember that my first turn was a talk about an artist called Whistler, whose life and career I thought might be of interest in various aspects to the New Sheridan Club. And tonight, for a complete change of place, I'm going to talk about an artist called Whistler. But this time not James Abbott McNeill Whistler, but Rex Whistler. Now, when I blithely said last week that, I could cobble together a talk about Rex Whistler, I don't know what I was thinking, because as soon as I started to do it, I realised that there's a massive amount of material I'd love to show you. And I'm also very aware that a lot of you will know just as much about Whistler as I do. So I've had to try and narrow it down a bit this evening. And so I will have a brief canter through his life and career. And I've tried to show you or illustrate the talk, especially for the printed material anyway, from objects in my own collection. Because I've been collecting Whistler books and ephemera for about 7 or 8 years now.
At least.
So to start off with, here's our man. He was born not very far from here at all. I'm in Greenwich right now. He was born a couple of miles away in Eltham in June 1905. And he was christened Reginald John, but he was always intended to be known as Rex. His mother thought it sounded much grander. His mother was a vicar's daughter who'd married a builder, and that put their family in a slightly uneasy social position. They weren't the quality, and they weren't quite trade either, so it sort of made them a slightly inward-looking family. They didn't have many close friends, but they were a happy family, at least initially. Mother and father both painted and drew, and they encouraged their children, especially their sons, to do so. Rex had an older sister called Jessie, and that is all I know about Jessie, I'm afraid, so that's all you'll hear about her this evening. He had an older brother called Dennis, who was only 18 months older than him, and 6.5 years after Rex arrived Lawrence, and more about him later. Denny and Rex in particular loved to draw and did so continuously. Rex was encouraged by an aunt who would give him a new sketchbook every time he filled up an old one. And the boys their talent was spotted by their early teachers, and they were encouraged to join the Royal Drawing Society, which held annual exhibitions, national exhibitions. And Rex first entered that when he was 7 years old, and he won a prize 12 years in a row. Here is a newspaper cutting I dug up, not from a Royal Drawing Society exhibition, but from an exhibition of children's war art held in 1915. That's Rex's effort at the top. This is when he was 10 years old. It's very badly printed anyway. I don't know if you can make it out, but it is quite an impressive example for a 10-year-old of someone imagining a whole action scene, composing it in quite accurate perspective and filling it with lots of detail. It also quite reassuringly shows a small boy's enthusiasm for death and destruction. His other early influences were the normal ones, I suppose, comic books, but also the leading illustrators of the day like Arthur Rackham and Dulac. His drawing was never really corrected as a child. He was always self-taught up to the time that he went to the Slade school, and he would draw with his hand held in a strange fist, which seems very uncomfortable and awkward, especially if you want the flowing lines that Rex achieved. And he often drew figures from the feet up, which seemed a very logical, childlike way to think about it, so make sure they weren't cut off at the bottom of the page. His interest in the gruesome stayed with him throughout his teenage years, and even into adult life, when there was a distinct strain of the melancholy and the fatalistic. And this may have been started or intensified when Denny, his brother, died at the age of 11 from measles complicated by pneumonia. He eventually became close to his younger brother Lawrence. He had to wait for him to grow up and be companionable, as he said. And Rex seems to have been fairly self-sufficient otherwise. He went to Haileybury, a very minor public school, which was obsessed with sport, which Rex had no interest in at all, although he was quite good at rugby and broke his nose there, which accounted for the profile that later friends said made him look like a goat. But he could make friends easily through drawing, impressing the boys and sometimes even the masters with his satires, and doing practical jokes. Once he faked broken window pane in the sanatorium. He undermined the often petty discipline of the school. He just had no interest in it or any other kind of work. But he did develop a love of poetry, and this he shared with another boy at the school, slightly older, called Ronald Fuller. And the two of them produced their own illustrated books of poetry and history. Here is a book plate that Rex did for Ronald slightly later on, which I own, and he was absolutely horrified when he saw this printed up and begged Ronald to burn it, but he didn't, and it became the first of about 25 to 30, I think, book plates that he designed. Anyway, it shows you his love of the Gothic horrors, I think. Another and very important formative influence on his whole aesthetic was a trip to visit Lawrence at school. Lawrence started at Stowe just after that school had been founded, and it was and still is founded in a stately pile which had belonged to the Dukes of Buckingham and Chandos, and it had a beautiful capability brown estates and Palladian buildings, which Rex was immediately struck by. And this love of 17th and 18th century in particular buildings informed a lot of his work throughout his career. He seems to have had a photographic memory almost, especially for architecture. Anyway, his school days were really spent drawing and not doing much else really, and he was not considered likely to pass the school certificate. But by the time he was 16, his parents had come round to the idea that he could have a career as an artist. The family consulted Eric Kennington, the war artist, who I know you had a talk about in the past. He happened to be living in the same village, and he looked at Rex's drawings, and he encouraged them to let him apply, and his drawings were good enough to get him a probationary place in the Royal Academy schools. So he was very young, much younger than the other students at the schools, 16, and he really floundered. As I said, he was entirely self-taught, and he found the total lack of instruction offered by the schools demoralising. He didn't do much work, and he failed his first assessments. And this, after a childhood of being constantly praised for his drawing, was a real wake-up call, and I think this may have been the start of his incredible work ethic. He never rested on his laurels for the rest of his life. But he wasn't downhearted enough to give it up. He instead applied to the Slade School, and this was a pivotal decision in his career. The Slade was run by a man called Henry Tonks, who was a former surgeon, but he'd become a draftsman, and his most famous drawings were made of disfigured soldiers in the First World War. They're quite remarkable things. But he made the Slade School renowned for its drawing instruction. He was generally a pretty austere and sometimes frankly terrifying teacher, but in Whistler he saw something really special, and he said that Whistler was one of only one or two natural draftsmen that he'd ever seen. And he liked Rex's sort of self-deprecating sense of humour. Rex said at his interview that he'd been sacked from the RA schools for incompetence. And that appealed to Tonks, and being able to score one over the RA didn't hurt Rex's chances either. So he was admitted to the Slade, and became a favourite of Tonks's immediately, who allowed him to sort of bend the curriculum to his will. And Rex won many prizes there, and later a travel scholarship that took him to Italy. And it was Tonks who recommended Whistler for the job of decorating the Tate Gallery's refreshment rooms in the basement of the Millbank building, which are now the restaurant that bears Rex's name. I don't know how many of you have been there, but it was a project that received national attention at the time. It was sponsored by the very famous art dealer Joseph Duveen. Rex got the job. He was only 20, and it took him 2 years to paint this quite large space, and it's very difficult to do it justice, but I'm showing here some illustrations from a guidebook to the murals. As you can see, it's a continuous landscape, and it was a fantasy intended to show a group of people leaving this city and travelling this fantastical countryside in pursuit of rare meats, of food to bring back to their city. And this was an immediate success. After those 2 years, it was launched in late 1927. It was immediately dubbed the most amusing room in Europe, much to Rex's embarrassment. But his career really flourished from this point. The room itself almost came to an immediate and sticky end. In January 1928, the River Thames overtopped its banks at various points within London and flooded the basement of the Tate, damaging lots of pictures, but fortunately, and actually completely submerging the painting here. But because Rex had used encaustic, which is mixing the pigment with wax, it survived. A lot of the other decoration didn't, like the painting on the skirting boards, but the actual mural itself survived and was restored in the last decade by the Tate. So the second significant development that happened because Rex joined the Slade School was he became acquainted with society, with a capital S. This is something Tonks had very much feared. He predicted a great boom in Whistler, I think is how he put it, once the refreshment rooms were opened, but he also feared that he would be sidetracked by all the diversions of a higher social sphere that he'd been introduced to. Rex had become friends with Stephen Tennant, who many of you will know about, was very wealthy and eccentric. He shared with Stephen a love of fairy stories and poetry. And Stephen took him into the world of the bright young things, the aristocrats, whose constant round of partying and hijinks and fancy dress kept the press amused for much of the 20s and 30s. Here are some of the said hijinks. This is a fancy dress event in Wilsford, which was Stephen Tennant's house in Wiltshire. This is Stephen Tennant. This is William Walton. Here's Rex with his hair powdered. This is Cecil Beaton. Rex enjoyed all this up to a point, but like Beaton, he wasn't really of this world. He was a middle-class boy who had to use his own talent to get on in the world, and he and Beaton worked extremely hard, often for the very people that they were socialising with. Rex was often quite pleased to get away from it all, in fact, and escape to Wilton, where his friend Edith Olivier lived. This is Edith Olivier here, and he met her in 1925, again via Stephen Tennant. But Edith Olivier is a quite remarkable figure, really, because she was over 30 years older than Rex and his friends. And I haven't got time to tell you all about her life tonight. What you should do if you want to find out about her is to read a book by Anna Thomason called The Blue Stocking and the Bright Young Thing, which deals in great detail with their relationship. And she had lived an exemplary spinster life in Wiltshire until the death of her sister. And after that, Edith decided that she was going to live, and she dyed her hair, and she started writing books, and she started travelling, and she threw herself into the bright young things social scene. And she lived near to Beaton and Tennant in Wiltshire, and also to Siegfried Sassoon, and she was very much part of their lives. And she and Rex were incredibly close. She came to love him almost romantically, almost maternally, very intensely. And she became his most reliable and supportive friend. Rex's other friends at the time included the Sitwells, and he provided illustrations for many of their books, and through them also William Walton and Lord Berners, and many, many other people. He became very popular, and all his friends, including Beaton, who could often be extremely waspish, commented on his sense of fun, his ability to amuse, and general lovability. And alongside this, a very sensitive, almost scholarly feeling for the life of the past. Rex loved children, he loved writing them illustrated letters, he painted lots of sensitive portraits of children. He would create whole books for them, just on country house weekends. He also loved fast cars. He inspired at least one character in a novel by Evelyn Waugh. I think people may have heard the suggestion that he's the model for Charles Ryder in Brideshead Revisited. There's no proof of that. I think Waugh himself never said anything of the kind, but it's quite likely that Rex appears in Scoop. Here is a scene with Julia Stitch, who is married on modelled on Lady Diana Cooper, whom Rex knew. She was still in bed, although it was past 11 o'clock. Her normally mobile face encased in clay was rigid and menacing as an Aztec mask. But she was not resting. Her secretary, Miss Holloway, sat at her side with account books, bills and correspondence. With one hand, Mrs. Stitch was signing cheques. With the other, she held a telephone, to which, at the moment, she was dictating details of the costumes for a charity ballet. An elegant young man on the top of a step-ladder was painting ruined castles on the ceiling. Josephine, the 8-year-old Stitch prodigy, sat on the foot of the bed, construing her day's passage of Virgil. Mrs. Stitch's maid, Brittling, was reading her the clues of the morning crossword. She had been hard at it since 7:30. Mrs. Stitch turned her face of clay, in which only the eyes gave a suggestion of welcome, towards her visitor. "Come in," she said. "I'm just going out. Why £20 to Mrs. Beaver?" "That was for Lady Jean's wedding present," said Miss Holloway. "I must have been insane. About the lion's head for the Centurion's breastplate, there's a beautiful one over the gate of a house near Salisbury, called Twisbury Manor. Copy that as near as you can. Ring up Country Life and ask for back numbers. There was a photograph of it about 2 years ago. You're putting too much ivy on the turret, Arthur. The owl won't show up." unless you have him on the bare stone, and I'm particularly attached to the owl. The precocious Josephine, of course, thinks all Arthur's work is banal. Now, if we were in the wheat sheaf tonight, I would be able to tell you... Oh, I don't know why I put them there. We'll zoom on a bit. I would be able to tell you that Rex lived and worked just around the corner, because in 1927 he rented some rooms at 20 Fitzroy Street. The building's not there anymore. He furnished it fairly sparsely, as you can see, and this is his centre of operations for most of the 20s and 30s. This is a picture of him in 1936 taken by Howard Coster. You can see the rest of the photo shoot in the National Portrait Gallery archive online. It's a particularly ridiculous pose, but it does show Rex with a telephone, which in fact he would rarely have answered. He was notorious for not really putting himself forward or being very good with business. This irritated Cecil Beaton, who was very good at putting himself forward, but he would often comment that Rex would ignore telephone calls and letters because he was too busy working, usually fuelled by champagne and slices of ham. So Whistler is really most famous, I think, in the public mind for his murals. I'll go back and look at those. And there's no way I can do justice to those, so I've wimped out by just showing you some very brief shots of some of them. This one is at Port Lympne in Kent. This was an earliest one in 1930. Quite fantastic combination of real objects, lamps and tassels, and trompe-l'oeil, which Rex seems to have mastered pretty much immediately. Two of them are very accessible though. This one is in a swanky private hotel, I think, but two are in National Trust properties. One is Place Newydd in Anglesey, which is this amazing dining room with an Italianate scene of shipping. This is just one end of it. You can see that the false perspective continues at either end of the room. And this was painted for the Marquis of Anglesey. Here is the detail. This little boat is supposed to contain Lady Caroline Paget, the daughter of the house, who was, there she is, was Rex's most enduring love. And when I say enduring love, I'm thinking of the Ian McEwan novel, because really the relationship brought neither of them any happiness. It was excruciating, in fact. And that was, Rex was particularly prone to falling in love with the most unsuitable women who would never love him back. And this caused him much anguish. Lawrence even went on to say that Rex's failure in his love life sort of vitiated all his other success in his career, which is a kind of tragic aspect of his life. In this detail, also from Place Newydd, you can see he's put himself in the scene. He's tucked away at the other end of the mural as a mere gardener. This is a very typical thing, but also very typical is this tiny little boy stealing fruit from this shop in the background. The whole work is absolutely crammed with detail like that and is highly recommended. There's another actually National Trust property, Dorney Wood. I think the grounds can be visited and sometimes the house by arrangement. So I'm just skipping over the murals really because many people know them and there's no way that I can really do justice to them. At the other end of the spectrum in terms of size were his book plates. These are things that I can collect. So here we have some for a publisher, Kenneth Ray, for whom he worked. This is one for Lady Diana Cooper. You see she's presented here as Diana the Huntress. There are lots of champagne bottles and also government boxes to represent her husband, Duff Cooper. And some more very typical and absolutely minute. The attention to detail and the sort of control of scale are absolutely fantastic. These things weren't always reproduced in a way that did the originals justice, but they are still wonderful things. So as I say, Rex worked pretty frenetically through the 1930s to try and keep out of debt, really. As I say, he wasn't good at money. He couldn't bring himself to ask for really the rate for the job. He often underestimated how long it would take him to do the job. And he was very generous and would often give away drawings for free. But this is some of the work that he produced. Book jackets are probably the most accessible things if you want to collect Rex Whistler. Now, these are some from the 30s. These two have a sort of bear a resemblance in terms of composition, but they're quite different in terms of actual technique. This one almost looks a bit like a Hogarth Press Vanessa Bell job. This is a wonderful caricature of, not a caricature, portrait of Edith Sitwell hovering on a cherub-supported cloud over the city of Bath. These are three more. These were bestsellers in the 30s, the Beverly Nichols Allway trilogy. Down the Garden Path, A Thatched Roof, and A Village in a Valley. When this took off and was reprinted many, many times, you can see there was an attempt to get some uniformity into the next two. But Rex put immense care into every aspect of the books he illustrated. This is the title page, obviously, from A Thatched Roof, with these beautiful pen and ink drawings. And he provided hundreds and hundreds of black and white and colour illustrations for books over the decade. These are some more to show his range. This is from the 20s, and this one is the later one from 1936. And as I say, he lavished care on every detail. The spines are just as important. After his death, there were quite a few imitators in the few years after Rex's death, and it comes to book illustration, and my heart skips a beat occasionally in a second-hand bookshop when I think I've found a new one and it turns out to be a very disappointing pastiche. You really rung the changes there. I think people think they know what a Rex Whistler book jacket design looks like. It will have swags and trophies and things like that, but I think this shows some of the variety that he could conjure up. Again, attention to detail. How about these for end papers? This is one of Rex's most important books. This is Hans Andersen's Fairy Tales from 1935. You can get it in red boards with green end papers or green boards with red end papers. It's a wonderful thing. You could also get a special limited edition in gold. I don't know if that's too shiny.
Pulled up, yeah.
No, I can see that.
So this book was thought to be so beautiful that Elizabeth Paget, Caroline's sister, carried it down the aisle at her wedding instead of a prayer book. So inside, Rex was the perfect illustrator for Hans Andersen, I think, with this mixture of the macabre, the sort of sweet and charming, the comic. This is a mixture of pen and ink drawings. He also used scraper board. He was an absolute genius at scraper board. There are hundreds of little vignettes like this throughout the book, and it again was printed many times, I think into the 1960s. He also worked for magazines. This is probably one of the more famous ones, the Radio Times. This is the Christmas number in 1931. And he produced ephemera. This is for the General Post Office. I think illustrated telegrams had been used in Europe, but not by the GPO until 1935, when they hired Rex to produce one for Valentine's Day that year, and they sold 49,000 of these on that day.
Wow.
In 1936, they had a design for more general use, This is the first greetings telegram from the post office that Rex designed. That was in use the second half of 1936. And then many artists after him designed these things. This one's a bit of a one-off. This is an invitation that he produced for, as you can see, the Lewis Carroll Centenary Exhibition in 1932. It's quite a masterful take on Tenniel, but also very Rex Whistler as well. It's quite a charming thing. He also worked in the theatre. He produced, sometimes he just produced the printed matter, the posters and programmes, but sometimes he did the sets and the costumes. He did the whole production for Pride and Prejudice here. This was a production he designed in its entirety twice. The first production was in New York. The play had been written, but because there was a decree by the Lord Chamberlain that no grandparent of a reigning monarch could be shown on the stage, there didn't seem much chance of being able to produce this in London at the time. And so this was first produced on Broadway, and then Rex allowed his original drawings to be sold while they were in America. So they were all dispersed. And then the next year, of course, George V dies, and suddenly a West End production is on the cards. So Rex has to redraw everything. And you can see, I think, some fairly typical Rex Whistler trademarks. You've got swags and columns and niches with statues in them. There's probably an urn in here if I look harder. I just include this one really for the sake of the caption. This scene is called Morning Glory, and it says, I think it's the charming scene in Prince Albert's dressing room at Windsor Castle, where the newly married Queen, relishing her wifely submission, has,
I don't remember that, dear.
well, basically, I can't actually read it. Basically, Albert orders her out of the room. But the detail,
as good as he gets, I think.
Yes, the detail that you can see, you can imagine the amount of work that was put into each of these productions. This one's pretty self-explanatory. This crest was designed by Rex. There is a very nice souvenir programme featuring this, but with a cutout design, which I'll get my hands on one day for when the President of France visited the Royal Opera. And he also worked for advertisers. So these are for Shell Oil. This is for BP, obviously. These are from the 30s. This one, this is his reversed heads. I think he started drawing these for children, and eventually they became adverts, and then after his death they also repurposed it as a book by Lawrence called Oho. He wrote poems to go with them, and that was also quite a good seller and quite readily available. Then he also worked for Guinness. Guinness produced lots of little illustrated booklets, gift booklets, which they sent out to doctors in order to promote, for doctors to promote Guinness. This one is great. I'm sure this character is something to aspire to for many of you.
Incy.
This one has parodies of traditional songs like Daisy Daisy, all completely coloured, with coloured illustrations throughout. And this one is for Rothmans. He produced quite a large number of drawings for Rothmans in the 40s, some of which they reproduced like these in the early 50s. And I think, again, these show you the fun that Whistler could have with the Victorian era. This one's called Victorian Vogue. This is what, well, Simon's wearing something pretty similar right now. These are called Matinee Idols. And again, his sense of fun, his observation, and ability to sort of recall any tiny detail and put it into his scene, I think it's wonderful. So, petrol, smoking, booze, he was promoting all these things in the 30s, but he really needed the money. But this is a slightly more upmarket lot. This is Fortnum & Mason's. He did the Christmas catalogues for Fortnum and Masons from 1932 to 1936. I've got 3, obviously. If you've got 1934, call me. This is another one for Fortnum's. This one is particularly nice because it has useful advice if you're throwing a debutante ball. Here's the menu. Here's Rex's idea of debutantes and their chaperone. You can see all this quite extreme cartoonishness about a lot of his figure drawing as well. This obviously didn't put off his clients in the 30s. It seems to have been a kind of sort of fairly robust sense of humour that doesn't seem to have gone down too badly at the time. It's quite an interesting dichotomy. There's intense tastefulness of his depictions of architecture, for instance, and his slightly ribald take on humanity itself. Finally, from Fortnum's, this is, if you're going for the shooting season, this is great. There's something almost Ronald Searle-esque about the energy of this one, I think. But you can see from this little portrait of the guns that Rex was quite familiar with these types by this time. He'd done enough country weekends. And he works on a whole sort of load of different miscellaneous projects. To show you 2 different ends of the scale, this one is a massive carpet, which was a one-off commissioned by Edward James, who was a patron of the Surrealists. Obviously, the scene of Neptune. This is the cartoon for it. It was produced by Wilson in the 30s. And at the other end of the scale, there's this little Wedgwood coffee cup. Rex designed a toile de Juillet for Christina Hamlin, who owned Clovelly, the Devon village. All the scenes are of Clovelly, and the designs were later transferred to Wedgwood pottery. So at the end of the 30s, Rex finds himself doing another mural, this time at Mottisfont Abbey in Hampshire, for Mrs. Maud Russell, who was a pretty difficult client. Again, it's very difficult to show you anything that does the room justice. It has extraordinary trompe-l'oeil effects. There's a hinted at here by this smoke you can just see pouring out of the urn. Mrs. Russell tended to change her mind about what she wanted, and this was caused Rex real angst because any lengthening of the project cost him money, and he was pretty desperate by the time he was coming to the end of this project. But on the day that, one day he found himself writing this at the top of a window. It was hidden and not discovered until much later. I was painting this ermine curtain when Britain declared war on the Nazi tyrants, Sunday the September the 3rd, 1939, RW. So it wouldn't be an NSC talk if I couldn't squeeze the Nazis in. So there you go.
Hope you're watching this, Essex.
But Rex very quickly departed from Mottisfont and never returned. As soon as war was declared with Germany, he felt he wanted to fight. It was a moral imperative. And he was perfectly well aware that he was too old to need to, he wouldn't be called up. He didn't enlist at all. There were many people who were willing to give him safe jobs, sort of in the camouflage department, I think, at the MOD, which Cecil Beaton joined. But he felt he needed to be actually be in the fight. But perhaps his association with commercial work I've just been showing you, even with the bright young things themselves, sort of lessened the idea of him as a proper artist. He certainly wasn't considered by the War Artists Advisory Committee, led by Kenneth Clarke, until very late in the day, I think. Lawrence Whistler rather pointedly says that they considered about 750 other people first. And by that time, Rex had managed to get himself a commission in the Welsh Guards. Here is I'm sure you're very familiar with this picture of him. This is his first picture in his newly arrived uniform. This is a friend's flat overlooking Regent's Park. So he eventually joins the Welsh Guards after quite a wait in summer 1940. And with them, he spent 3 years training to be in command of a tank. A less likely combination of man and function. It's hard to imagine. He knew, and he still told people he would probably be a useless soldier. But in fact, he inspired great loyalty and affection among his men, apparently. And he was certainly always willing to cheer them up, because you can see his compulsion to draw at all times didn't stop in the army classroom. This is his notebook with a Baroque tank. Some improvements there, and this grotesque waterfall. This is a helpful diagram about kit inspection. And he also very quickly sketched loads of cartoons for his friends in the mess. This is one that someone rescued from a waste bin. It's called Bacchus and Ariadne after Titian. Is it Titian? It was never ending, really. He improved the officer's mess. This is his drawing of what it was like when he got there. Chaos, bad lighting, etc. This was his vision of what it could be. And in fact, he did produce old master paintings to decorate the mess, and a stuffed fish in a glass case. This is all painted on bits of scrap wood. I think about 13 of the old masters survive. There was a fantastic looking exhibition in the 90s at the National Army Museum, which catalogued all the work that Rex Whistler did during the war. And here is him again, brightening up Quadford camp with the regimental badge that he's painting on the side of the building there. And this is the Christmas card that he did for the regiment in 1940. I've got a couple of copies of this. On this one, he seems to be working out a new idea for 1941, whatever Lawrence says there. But again, there's no diminution in quality of his work. He's working just as hard as before, as well as doing his army training. But he's also doing commercial work as well. In the 3 years that he is training, he worked on 4 West End plays, including An Idle Husband by Oscar Wilde. He worked on 4 ballets. This is one of them. He had to recreate the designs for this that had first been produced in 1935. At the invasion of Holland, the Sadler's Wells Company were touring there, and they had to flee, leaving all the sets and costumes behind. And so Rex recreated them for the revived production in 1942. And this absolutely fantastic looking act drop. So it's like a Hogarth, but with all the people removed. So they perform in front of this curtain. He produced this exquisite set of drawings for the author A.E.W. Mason, based on Mason's novel Königsmark. This was for Mason's private copy, to be bound with his manuscript. There were 10 drawings. I think you're probably all devotees of Talking Pictures TV, and if you ever get the chance, if you watch Saraband for Dead Lovers, that is based on the same story as the novel. And Rex finished these exquisite drawings in digs at Caterham in 1941. He also worked on a film set. This is for A Place of One's Own, which was based on a novel by Osbert Sitwell. The Sitwell asked him to do the work, but thinking that Rex might be excused military duty in order to do them. Well, Rex did them anyway, but he wasn't excused military duty. We managed to see this film. It's not really available. I saw a kind of pirated DVD of it last night. The other night, and say it was a crushing disappointment. It's not quite true, but I don't think much of Rex's work was used. These are all his annotations, where he's giving extra directions. There should be many more pictures on this piano, for instance. You can see the enthusiasm and the ability to imagine a complete scene in incredible detail, which he brought to all his dramatic designs. This is more magazine work. This is very patriotic for the Listener in 1941. You might not have seen this one before. This is equally patriotic, but this is a birthday card to Adolf Hitler, which was published in Illustrated magazine. As you can see, it says Hitler as a small boy here, crying over his birthday cake, with lots of very strange things being thrown at him, like a bunch of carrots and a bedstead and a coal scuttle, for reasons which I haven't really been able to fathom. But anyway, it's all love from the RAF. While he was doing all this, too, Rex developed a new painting style. These were just for himself. They were just done quite spontaneously wherever he happened to be. And they mark what could have been a really interesting direction in his art. This is Edith Olivier's house, the Day House. This is Rex's Hudson Terraplane. To say he enjoyed fast cars. I believe the Terraplane was a fast car. But they evoke, they're very evocative of mood and sunlight. And they, I think, exude a sense of quietness, calm before the storm, if you like, or at least calm away from often sort of frenetic army life. There's another one at East Mersey. The boredom of army life, officers' mess tent, just waiting and waiting to do something. I think on Salisbury Plain, that one. In this sense, I think Rex did become a war artist. And he produced a number of pretty promising portraits of his fellow soldiers as well. So this is Rex with his tank crew. This is his Sergeant Sherlock. This bunch were very close. They welded a box on the back of the tank so that Rex could put his paint box in it. And that's what they took with them to war. So this is Rex's very last painting that he did in his billet in Brighton in summer 1944. Waiting to embark for France. It's much a return to sort of typical Whistler, really. This is an allegory of the Prince Regent awakening the spirit of Brighton. I'm sure it'll be very familiar to lots of people. But it's got the cheekiness as well as the sense of period as well that we associated with him. It's also beautifully painted, but according to a fellow officer, didn't take Rex more than 3 hours to do. So Rex eventually got to do his bit in the war after all that training and waiting. He arrived in Normandy in July, and after a couple of weeks, during which time he found time to send Edith Olivier and his mother some camembert cheeses. This is his last letter to Edith, which went with the cheese, and she received it on the day he died. His battalion engaged with the enemy on the afternoon of July the 18th, 1944, as part of Operation Goodwood. They were crossing a railway cutting, and the other two tanks crossed it successfully, but the tracks of Rex's were caught up in a telephone wire. And for some reason, all the crew left the tank to cut the wire, which is something they should not have done. And suddenly, out of nowhere, they came under enemy fire and were pinned down. Rex saw that his crew were caught, and so he ran 60 yards or so open ground to the next tank where his troop sergeant was, to explain the situation and order him to shoot up the village. As he jumped down for the return journey, a mortar shell exploded at his feet, basically. He was thrown into the air, his neck was broken, and he fell dead. His sergeant followed his orders and went and dealt with the attackers in the village, and then returned and carried his body, which was completely unmarked, to lie under a hedge where he hoped to return later the evening and to bury it. But when he came back, it had been found by an officer of another regiment, coincidentally an acquaintance of Lawrence Whistler's, who buried it in an army blanket as an unknown officer. Sergeant Sherlock amended that in red wax pencil, apparently, putting a name on the makeshift cross that had been placed on the grave, and Whistler's body was eventually buried at Banville-la-Campagne, which is a Commonwealth War cemetery a couple of miles distant. And there he lies. I didn't really want to leave it with that picture. I thought we'd leave it with this picture, which I think sums up a little bit of what I've been trying to suggest about Whistler, is that he had, tremendous virtuosity, incredible generosity, like just tossing off drawings like this inexhaustibly, a sort of macabre sense of humour, love for garden statuary even. But I think he brought a lot of joy to many people who knew him, and many who, when they learnt of his death, almost felt, well, it should have been me. Several people said that, and although I haven't found any real corroboration for this, I have heard that of all the deaths in the Second World War, Whistler's obituary in the Times sparked the most number of letters to the editor. His brother Lawrence obviously was heartbroken and spent really the rest of his life as the keeper of the flame, as Stephen Calloway calls him. He wrote 2 biographies of Rex, one in the 40s, 1948, and one in 1985, and he produced a catalogue of all his work and organised a memorial exhibition in 1960. And I think thanks to these efforts, Rex hasn't really slipped out of the public consciousness, although it's very hard to categorise. He himself showed absolutely no interest in modernist movements, but he sort of still stakes out his own place in British art history. And more recently, he's had other champions, such as Stephen Calloway, who curated an exhibition in Brighton in 2006. Of course, we'll never know what he would have done if he'd lived longer than 39. There was another very lavishly produced biography in 2012, and the Salisbury Museum was given a huge archive by his family of sketches and drawings recently, which has also, I think, revived interest in him. So that is my talk about Rex Whistler, and I wonder how we're going to...
So I'm going to keep this video running, so people want to post questions. At the same time, I see that Shona... So James Rigby had a Zoom meeting going on, but I think you might... That's coming up to end, but I think I saw that Shona has now got a new one going. So I will attempt to access that on my laptop whilst keeping the other thing going. I'm not sure our Wi-Fi can handle this, but we'll see.
Which one?
So if you got questions you want to ask,
There seems to be some questions.
by all means post them here because I can see them. Darcy Sullivan says, was he an influence on Gory?
I have no information on that. Do you think? I wouldn't be surprised, but I couldn't tell you. And I'm sure we have some other Gory experts among us who might know more than I do.
Someone just asked, can you post questions here? Yes, please do. I might try and access the Zoom meetings. I only installed Zoom yesterday, so I've never used it. But this seems to be working, so if you do have questions, just post comments here. Right now, a lot of plaudits are coming in. Darcy says a lot of urns, which is true. Gotta like an urn. Yeah, I will post the slide. In fact, while you think about your questions, I will just post all these slides as images right now to this event. Hang on.
Wow. Technology, eh? I hope you'll soon be able to see much better quality images. Torquil's just said that he's reminded of Osbert Lancaster, and I think that's very true. They both had an amazing eye for architectural detail and social quirks as well, I think. And again, as I said, I think during the talk, as I was looking at them, I could see hints of perhaps Ronald Searle in some of them. But Whistler has a strange sort of set of influences himself, I think, because for painting, he was looking back as far as Claude and Poussin, and an amazing sort of ability to evoke those kind of golden misty sunsets, but at the same time to do incredibly robust, to say the least, caricatures of human subjects. I think that's something that reminds me of Osbert Lancaster.
You can look at questions there. I'm just trying to upload these pictures. Obviously our Wi-Fi is under a certain amount of strain at the moment. But while I do that, you can look at some questions there.
Okay. Apparently the Wi-Fi is buckling under the strain, but we'll try and get those pictures up for you. What cocktail is Ali drinking? That's white wine, Chris. That was an easy one. How did I first get an interest in this topic? I lived as a child near Romsey, which is very near Montespan Abbey, and I saw Whistler's room then, and was amazed by it, and then really probably didn't think about him for another 20 years. And then when I started collecting books, I thought, this is something I want, and I've just sort of, the more I collect, the more interested in him I am. I should point out that I just get my stuff on eBay, so they're mostly not the greatest examples, but they build up into quite a nice collection. How did someone manage to pack so much into such a short time? That's a good question, really. I think he sacrificed a lot to the work. I mean, he was hopelessly disorganised. He liked fast cars, but he often didn't have the money to tax them or to remember to tax them. He was always worried about finances. He often didn't get back his original artwork, which was his property, and that created some problems, like having to redo the set and costume drawings that I talked about. And I don't think he was quite as much of a bright young thing as many other people. He would bunk off and go and have a quiet weekend at Wilton with Edith Olivier to get the work done, rather than partying very hard. But he was distracted by his socialising to some extent, but I think he did sacrifice a lot to getting the work done. Oh, that's someone else is reminded of Edward Gorey. It's that one. Okay. I see what people are talking about now. Any other questions? Or are we going to go to
I think
Zoom.
we'll attempt to go onto the Zoom thing, so I'll end this video now. Thanks very much to everyone who watched. I think at one point we got to about 48 people watching it.
Wow.
Took me a while to work out what this number in the top left-hand corner was. But thanks very much for watching. If you want to join us on Zoom now, this is assuming we manage to get in. If not, we'll probably see you via the internet sometime next month. Okay, bye.
Bye.